This is the Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast, Week 16, NFL Picks. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and I'm joined by the Scores lead betting analyst, Mr. Matt Russell. How are you doing, my dude? How are you feeling on this fine, we're heading into Week 16. I can't believe it. We're almost here.
Yeah, I should really start Christmas shopping at some point here soon. You look up, and Week 16 means Christmas is around the corner. So, gotta get on some stuff here. This is a mess, man. Week 16, we're getting into that cluster bleep portion of the program. So this should be an interesting podcast on a Wednesday morning, trying to figure out 4 or 5 days ahead of time who's supposed to play, what are we supposed to expect from said team, are the markets adjusting to last week, like what does that all mean, what are we supposed to believe out of it? I mean, let's just get into it, man. Like this is a mess.
There's a lot going on, and we'll get into the particulars in the sec, but I can never be accused of not being upfront with what's going on with the picks. As mentioned every week, I give what my picks are. Last week, not so good.
Oh, no.
5, 10, and 1 last week, bringing the season total to 112, 106, and 6 on the season. Now, obviously, once we get into the games, we'll be able to break down exactly what happened last week, which was just hilarious in some instances. And other instances, I just should have listened to Matt, as always. Because you know what? For the people that might be new to the podcast, I feel like an explanation of what we do here is needed at times. And what we do here is I will give a pick for each and every game, and then Matt comes in with the information and education on where the line is, where it was, where it could be heading into kickoff. And hopefully we come out on the other end with a better idea of what I'm doing. That's the goal. We're going to get back to profit here by the end of the season of this pod. So here we go as we begin, as we do each and every week on Thursday Night Football. I don't know why I said that so dramatic. As if
I liked it. I thought that the Sunday primetime music was going to pop up, like da 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 da. Anyway,
I like it. We are starting on Thursday Night Football, as mentioned, with the Saints at the Rams. Rams at home, favored by 4 points. The Saints injured your man's Tommy DeVito before mocking him. Not before mocking him, pardon me, as they beat the Giants. And I still don't really buy the Saints team as an operation, like just as a whole. Don't really know what I'm seeing there. So give me the Rams just off that point alone. I feel like the Rams are, the Saints don't really play well or as well on the road, but I also feel like the Rams are a squad where, especially since Williams has been back, the running game, they kind of have an identity, know what they're doing. And then, of course, Cooper Kupp, my guy Puka, doing work, Stafford's healthy, all that fun stuff. I know I shouldn't really be laying 4 points. That's a tough spot to be. I don't really like it, but the job here is for me to make picks, and I'm going to make the pick, and I hope you will not talk me out of this one, but I'm at -4 with the Rams.
Yeah, you mentioned the job is to make picks, right? And so, to let everybody behind the curtain, right? It's Wednesday morning, right? Which, it's one thing when it's Wednesday morning in like week 1. That's fine. We've had all summer. It's another thing when it's week 1 or week 18 and it's Wednesday morning. It's another situation where it's week 16. And, a lot of times we'll talk about the Monday night game where it's like, listen, it's 4 or 5 days away. This past Monday night game, we had quarterback injuries. Issues that weren't really settled right up until, like, honestly 5 minutes before kickoff, essentially, right? And so we talk like, okay, and I plug my stuff over at the Score, and I say, okay, just read my article about the game. Then, like, I'll have sort of a more concrete view of the game. Even though this isn't a Monday night game, this is a Thursday night game. This is happening literally tomorrow. I got to kind of play that card here. I have to dig in deeper into this. I haven't wrote my article yet. For the Thursday night game. And so, like, don't hold me to this necessarily, because I still have to do that. I would say this, just looking at the Saints, obviously their recent opponents. It's like you mentioned, obviously the Giants, the Panthers at home, scenarios where we don't want to get involved in the Saints necessarily. We're not dying to lay points with the Saints, right? We did 2 weeks ago. We faded them last week. We end up going sort of 1-1. A staple record, a 500 record of betting in general, where you're going to end up kind of losing the juice there. Now they go on the road and they play a pretty good team. And what we have to sort of evaluate here is like how good the Rams actually are. And the Rams are kind of a tricky team to evaluate too, because honestly, they haven't played much recently outside of that trip to Baltimore. And that's the one that might be the game that you kind of anchor to as far as what the quality of the Rams actually is. You mentioned Kyren Williams being like, honestly, maybe the second best running back in the league based on the fact that he's like, I think he's like fourth in rush yards, and he missed like 4 or 5 games this season. So listen, I'm loath to bet on Derek Carr. In theory, betting him as an underdog is, a little bit more of a palatable situation, but at -4 against a team in the Rams that is pretty good, I'm probably going to be ending up leaning that direction. This is a more interesting game, certainly than last week's game and than some of these other games that we've seen, where if you play around with ESPN's, playoff machine there, there's a lot of scenarios that are very reasonable scenarios where if this game was being played in week 18, this would be winner gets in, losers out. And because it happens in week 16, we don't sort of consider it that interesting, right? Like this would be a potential like Sunday night last game of the season type situation, all for all the marbles, because every time you toggle back and forth, you click those logos on the playoff machine and you click on the Saints logo and they show up as like the 6th seed. Then you click on the Rams and then the Saints go away and it turns into a Rams logo, right? That's what we're talking about here with the game. So, and for me personally, on sort of from a futures betting perspective, I have some Saints to miss the playoffs here. So I'll already be kind of like hoping that the Rams win this game anyway. It's just a matter of -4 being a number that I'm not like super pumped to lay just, at this point.
Yeah.
So we'll be deeper into it. We'll obviously have some props and stuff for the game. But for me, the lean is certainly the Rams here.
Yeah, I'm definitely liking the Rams, and I mentioned the organization. We're talking about McVay versus what's the dude's name, the coach of the Saints? Why am I drawing a blank? Your
Dennis
boy.
Allen. Yeah,
I know you're a big Dennis Allen guy.
I'm a huge Dennis Allen guy. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So
Dennis Allen and Derek Carr. Let's go.
Yeah, I like making institutional bets at certain points, as I like to call them. Yeah. We move on to Saturday, and Saturday games. I mean, last week was just a gong show for me. I think I did not get any of the Saturday games right last week. If I'm going back through the archives here, but new week, new opportunities. Unfortunately, we got the Steelers at home as 2.5-point favorites, and I don't like that against anybody.
Yeah, because they're not, Shell. You did it again. Remember last week? You got the wrong side here as far as
how did I what did I do here? It's Bengals 2.5.
I feel like this is a bit at this point where you're like trying to catch me or
I think it's comic relief.
2.5 right now.
We need some comic relief, and so like my goal here is just to have some comic relief between the two of us where it's like, hey, waka waka waka, something like that. I don't know. Is that comic relief?
Yeah, it's a Fozzie Bear situation.
So here's the thing, though, right? Bengals on the road favored in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
by 2.5 points.
Just doesn't make any more sense than Pittsburgh laying points, right?
I mean, does that make more sense? No, neither way does this make sense to me, because the Bengals as 2.5-point road favorites in Pittsburgh. Joe Burrow is not walking through that door. Jamar Chase is not walking through that door.
Yeah.
Your man's Jake Browning, now 2.5-point favorites. Like, if my guy Mike Tomlin is going to take something personally and do his whole rah-rah Mike Tomlin bit, which appears to be the only thing that kind of works for them.
It's the only thing that people rely on their handicaps of these games based on.
For sure. So I look at this game and I would be on the Steelers plus 2.5. Give me the points here. And the strange thing about this game is watching the Bengals last week. I'd love to get your take on that game, because that was a gong show. Your man's Browning was putting in work late, at least early on, not too good. and then realize, hey, I got to just throw it up to T. Higgins. And that worked. That worked well. So heading into this week, and that might be your top weapon here. Well, it is his top weapon. What do you make of this game going forward as I correct the line here, as it is Bengals favored by 2.5, and I am on the Steelers plus 2.5? Please talk me out of taking Mike Tomlin here.
No, I think it's the only side you can take here. You mentioned Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow not walking through that door, and obviously that's relatively important. I kind of think, I don't say more important, because I mean, we're talking about two like all-pro caliber players, but close to as important. And what was frustrating about the game on Saturday, and we can talk about that, a little bit here, is DJ Reader out for the season for the Bengals, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember a couple of years ago when he missed a playoff game, it was like all anybody talked about. There's always the thing that everybody talks about leading up to a playoff game, right? There's like an injury situation, a circumstance, and it's like everybody just echo chambers over and over and over, like this is going to be an issue, this is going to be an issue. And DJ Reader was that thing. And because he's, nose tackle, like blocking taking up all the blockers, from a defensive interior standpoint. And he goes out of that game, and the Vikings were just chewing up yards on the ground with Chandler. And then they kind of stopped doing that. And it was driving me absolutely crazy, because it's just NFL football team just outthinking themselves. Because, I think they might have stopped Chandler 2 or 3 times in a row. And now you're just putting it in the hands of Nick Mullins, which is absolutely infuriating.
Wait, you're not a Nick Mullins guy? No,
I am. No. I was honestly, okay. So here's the depressing part. There was one, there's always one game that, like, we do the podcast on Wednesday. I write all my stuff on Friday, that by the time sort of Friday night, Saturday morning rolls around, there's a game that I talk myself into, that I've been kind of, that I was like, well, I didn't really, certainly on Wednesday, like we didn't have enough information. And that was that game, because Justin Jefferson was like healthy and good to go. And it was like, okay, like if he's fine to play here, Nick Mullins is going to do a lot more, Kirk Cousins-ish type stuff. And like Josh Dobbs is really bad. And, this has to be a massive upgrade. And the market, sort of agreed. So they, took that number down from 4.5, 3.5 to 3. So you could bet 3.5. And in the Circa Millions contest, it was 3. I was like, honestly, I kind of just think the Vikings win this game outright. And so I needed kind of needed a 5th pick for Circa Millions. And so, I added the Vikings. Now, was I wrong in all of that? Listen, they got a set, 14-point lead. That honestly should have been 20 points if Nick Mullins literally just falls down instead of tries some crazy bleep. And we'll talk about, the Vikings.
Try some Jimmy G stuff.
Yeah, like even like Jimmy G on hyperspeed, and even like the 2 Jordan Addison touchdowns. Those were A, bad decision, and B, a bad throw that Addison that Mullins got away with in the first place, and then Addison made a great catch on the run, like almost like kneecap or even ankle level catch. And so it's just like, man, if the Bengals, like, yeah, they pulled that out and they end up pushing that number in the contest and winning at plus 3.5, but it was just sort of like, they should have lost to Nick Mullins at home. The Bengals did. And that was with Jamar Chase for like, half that game. And then obviously that we haven't even gotten into the idea of like Jake Browning just sort of tossing it up and having, you mentioned it, like T. Higgins coming down with 2 different passes that really, when the ball goes up in the air, it's one of those things where the camera pans over and you're expecting there to be nobody over there except for the receiver. Like, it's such a crazy pass that there had to have been a coverage breakdown. Yeah. And then you see, it's like, oh no, there's 2 defensive backs. Like, at the very least, this ball is going to get knocked away. And in neither situation, one, I think it was like a 3rd and 15 type situation where the first down gets converted. And of course, the other one's a just absolute back-breaking touchdown. And again, that's before we even get into the idea of like Nick Mullins on a with the smallest guy on the team pushing him from behind on a Philly tush push situation.
Yeah.
So I just look at it and I go like, well, what are we getting excited about the Bengals for when like the Vikings did everything in their that they possibly could to lose that game? And the answer to that is, well, like the Steelers are by and large dreadful. And they're going, and then of course the subsequent game is we had the Colts and we ended up to win that game. And so, all's well that sort of ended well with a 1-0-1 record on those first 2 games from a contest perspective and a 2-0 record from a betting standpoint. But it's like, okay, like I didn't understand why the money was moving towards Mitch Trubisky on the road.
Mhm.
And so it's like, well, how can you bet on Mitch Trubisky? And the good news this week is we're not betting on Mitch Trubisky with the Steelers, right?
Yeah.
Now the problem is we're betting on Mason Rudolph. But if all that Mason Rudolph has to do is by and large hand the ball off, and the Steelers can have kind of the most success that they've had all season,
Yeah.
and they can, I don't know, knock those stupid Jake Browning passes down.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And like, by the way, Nick Mullins was like carving them up pretty significantly. So
He
maybe
was.
Mason Rudolph can do just honestly half of that from a good standpoint, and like just not have the backbreaking turnovers. And yeah, you do have the situation where from a record standpoint, the Steelers are still alive for the playoffs. They aren't alive when, you bust out the ESPN playoff machine, because every sort of reasonable permutation has them, being left out of the playoffs. And I think they're to make the playoffs odds are like plus 300 or something like that. But like, they don't know that. And so this is that backs against the wall scenario that, like, if you were going to, bet on the Mike Tomlin voodoo, I think like Mitch Trubisky cancels out Mike Tomlin voodoo. I don't know that Mason Rudolph does. And so, they're missing a couple of guys. They obviously Casey got suspended for the rest of like time, basically, for
Yeah.
that hit against Pittman. And Minkah Fitzpatrick hurt himself, but he hurt himself again, which means, which implies that the Steelers have been without him earlier this season, which they have.
Mhm.
And listen, the defense wasn't great necessarily. But again, without Jamar Chase and kind of your best option as a, from a Bengals offensive standpoint, throwing jump balls to T. Higgins, it's like, that's defendable. You don't need a primo defense to be able to necessarily do that. So, this is all to say that I'm in agreement with you. I'm waiting. I haven't bet it. I certainly, normally it's like 2.5 points. Let's go to the tease. Like, I think teasers, I think you got to cancel teasers for the rest of the season, because honestly, we don't know like what the deal is with any of these teams. So even scenarios where like plus 8.5 with the Steelers, like that sounds good. And it's like, yeah, or they just don't score and the Bengals win the game like 10-0, 17-7 or something like that. But like, I think the play here is I'm, hoping maybe, fingers crossed that we get a full 3 with this, because, again, like, who wants to bet on the Steelers at this point? But that's the difference between this week and last week, because people wanted to bet on the Steelers. The line fell to -1, at the Colts with Mitch Trubisky. Like, that's ridiculous. And so
Yeah.
using that rating, I can't, using that rating, and I think what is a pretty stable now Bengals rating at, as a below average team, I can't get to Bengals -2.5 on the road. I can't, unless you massively downgrade the Steelers. And I just don't, as much as we've seen from the Steelers lately, I still can't fathom downgrading them that significantly when, the voodoo is real, right? Like, the voodoo pops up, it'll get you. I think it gets the Bengals this week.
Yeah, for sure. I totally just look at this game. This is a Steelers at home win that they need to get. Let's go. We've seen this before, time and time again.
You should reference the
And you're
number.
getting points. Let's go.
Yeah,
Right? Like, you're getting points. Of course, I'm going to take the points here against Jake Browning.
Yeah, getting points implies that, like, the Steelers rating, we always talk about, how far a team drops or where they are relative to average. It implies that the Steelers are 31 out of 100, which is like, one of the worst teams in the league, essentially, right? It's like, it's above, Panthers, Patriots, etc. And, honestly, like, maybe they are as bad as the Panthers and the Patriots. I mean, they certainly lost to the Patriots, a week ago. So you could certainly make that case. It's just, I think we're going to get the best effort possible out of the Steelers team. And, again, I can't get to a number where the Bengals are favored here.
We'll see where we get to with these numbers here, as the Buffalo Bills Saturday night are in LA against the Chargers and favored by 12 points. And normally I start on the double-digit point saying I'll take the double-digit points and I need to talk myself out of it. In this instance, though, the wagons are circling. The mafia is hype.
Right.
The beef with Buffalo in the past was they beat up on bad teams. And when I look on the other side, I still see a man's Easton Stick and a team that gave up, 63 last week. The only thing I guess I'm worried about here as I lay the 12 points with the Bills is, am I supposed to be worried about a new coach bump with Easton Stick?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think new coach.
I'm asking the question. I pose the question.
Yeah, it's new coach / gave up 63 points and got embarrassed, in a standalone primetime national televised, or streamed, I guess, game. right? And so this has actually been kind of an interesting line, because the look ahead projections before the Bills beat the Cowboys and after the Chargers lost that game was Bills minus 10.
Okay.
And I actually, I look at it and I'm like, that's a little low. And because my numbers came out to 10.5. And so, but I didn't do anything. I'm like, okay, well, let's see what happens. Because, as we talked about last week, Dallas and Buffalo was a better game to sort of watch in theory. Didn't end up being that case. Than to have, than to conceptually bet on, right? Like, I didn't feel like there was necessarily a great side in that game. So I didn't have a side on that one. So I wait. And then it reopens after the Bills win. Again, the Chargers had long since, fired everybody in town. And the line reopens 13.5 widely and 14 in some places.
Let's go.
And I look at that and I go like, well, that's too high, right? Because of the circumstances that you just sort of said, right? Like, there's just no way that the number is going to stay, or it didn't, it certainly didn't feel like there was a way that was going to stay. But you wait and you hope. And the thing is like the idea of hoping that you get to bet on the Chargers, like, is sort of antithetical to like any sort of like reason.
Yeah.
So I didn't bet it because I'm just like, okay, well, if it's still 13.5, then I will bet that. And then a widely sort of recognized popular tout service gives out Chargers plus 13.5. And when they give that out, the line crashes or goes up depending on what side that they're on. And they're on the Chargers at plus 13.5, unwilling to wait or see to see if 14 we get to 14 or anything like that. And it crashes down to minus 10.5, exactly where my projection was in the first place. So I go, okay, 10.5, like, that's just the number. Honestly, at a fair number, like, I would lean towards the Bills with you as well. But we're ticking back up because I think people are probably thinking the same way. So it's funny how like we all sort of think the same way, whether the game plays out. I mean, hell, the Chargers could win this game. The Bills could win this game by 4 touchdowns, right? There's nothing to say that the point spread's even going to come into play necessarily in this game. But it is funny to see, like, okay, like, yeah, 10.5, and I probably lean towards the Bills. And the line goes up to where you've got it now at 12. I think 11.5, a little bit more widely available, but 12, I think, is in the mix. So it's like, which do you you roll with? The sort of value concept of like people, seeing 13.5 and seeing that number is too high. And obviously the only way you lose on that is if it, lands exactly, or if you lose by following that, I should say, is if it lands exactly on 13. Now you can lose, they can lose on plus 13.5. We could all lose on plus 13.5, all, by, like I said, the Bills winning convincingly. So, you just look at it and you go, okay, like the Bill, all of it makes sense. Bills on a short week, Chargers on a long week. You watch it, you go back and you look at, nobody's ever going to rewatch that Chargers game, but at least from a memory perspective, you look at that Chargers game and like, what was that fueled by? Fumble in the first half, right? And like,
yeah,
that's a sign of not being prepared, right? Not being physically and mentally prepared. Like, holding onto the football is a mental thing. You have to be able to, secure the ball, brace yourself for contact, and just be unwilling to give the other team the ball, right? Yeah. And like, they weren't unwilling to give and like, obviously the Easton Stick fumble, it's like, okay, he's just not, he doesn't have the sort of the capacity right now to play at a mid-season type speed. But like, some of the other fumbles were just like careless stuff. The defense then sort of gets let down because they're, it's 21-0 before they've even really had to do that much, or, they're playing short fields. And then like, honestly, things get just flat out wacky with Stick throwing that interception on a screen pass where the Raiders DB like jumps it, by a mile. Like, it's just, what's he supposed to do? He's running the play. Like, you have to tip your cap to the Raiders for being prepared for that. So the point is like, okay, yeah, they got beat down, really, really badly. But like, honestly, 2 weeks ago, the Ravens, who I think everybody has at least slightly, rated slightly better than the Bills, came into LA and were about, 3.5 point favorites in that game. So the only real difference, I should, listen, it's a big difference, is Justin Herbert for Easton Stick and Keenan Allen probably not playing again this season.
Yeah.
Those are two pretty big differences. Are those 10-point differences? Like, I find it hard to sort of get to a 10-point difference
Mhm.
And it's obviously it's an important position, it's an important combination, but a 10-point difference, and it's not a 10-point difference where one team's 5-point favorite, now they're a 5-point underdog, where the difference is, kind of between winning and losing. The difference here is between winning comfortably, and then winning by a ton in the NFL. So like, I don't think you can bet on the Bills here at anything kind of higher than 10 and a half, just based on, like, I don't know, history, everything we've ever seen in our lives. Like, I think the number is like 18-3 when a team gets blown out the way that the Chargers get blown out the next week against the spread. 18-3, they're covering, obviously at a like an astronomical rate. So I think this is just wait. There's gonna be a lot of wait and sees here. This one's more wait about the number. If this thing continues to creep up, I'd like to at least get plus 13 here, so that if it lands on 13, that it pushes. So that's going to be the way that I play it. I'm going to wait, and then bet the Chargers at the very end. Not some huge bet, certainly not something I'm going to, rest a contest play on. But, this is a numbers play, right? It's, the number should be about 10.5, 11. Worth mentioning, that is with the Chargers getting rated like just absolutely terribly, in the same way that they were rated that terribly before the Raiders game, down into the mid 20s. This number has them as the worst team in the league. And maybe that's the case, but after a change, you're going to have the attention of the players, which you did not have last week. And honestly, like, there is no kind of number that you can assign to that, but it's probably pretty huge, because we saw that number get away from the Chargers because they weren't interested in playing that game against the Raiders last week.
Yeah, no, totally understand where you're coming from for sure. Almost have me here on switching from the Bills, but I'm rolling with the Mafia for one more week at minus 12 here. Before we get to our next game, step into 2024 with confidence, thanks to Manscaped, where resolutions are met and hairs are neatly kept. As the new year approaches, why not make self-improvement a breeze by keeping your body well groomed? Introducing Manscaped's Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, the ultimate all-inclusive kit designed to help you feel as clean-cut and confident as you should. Featuring the Powerhouse Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, this next-gen trimmer ensures precision and ease when tackling your toughest hairs. So kick off 2024 with the trim above the rest and use code PICS20 at manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping. Hey, Matt, I got a question for you. As we wind down 2023, what was your highlight of the past year?
Listen, I don't know if my wife's listening right now, but I should probably say getting married to her this past year would be the highlight. But let's be honest here, man. It's every week getting to talk to you about the NFL.
Wow. I feel honored. That's a privilege here. I feel honored about that. So as we head into 2024, obviously the look is any New Year's resolutions?
Man, it's the same as it always is. As your man, Coach Singletary, once said, I want winners. We're going to do what we always do, man. We're going to go looking for winners in 2024.
I love it. That's what we always do here. Try to get you winners here on the pod. As we head into 2024, the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra is here. And let me tell you, it's got futuristic tendencies. Included in this bundle is a brand new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, the Weed Whacker 2.0 ear and nose hair trimmer, and the essential aftercare products like the Crop Soother Ball Aftershave Lotion and Crop Preserver Anti-Chafing Ball Deodorant. And 2 free gifts. New year, new you, and definitely a new trimmer. Manscaped's got your grooming resolutions covered. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code PICS20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use the code PICS20. Happy New Year to your balls. And now, back to the rest of the show. Let's keep it going here. We got the Cowboys. Move on to Sunday's action. Cowboys, who obviously just played the Bills, at the Dolphins as they continue a little AFC East tour here for Dak and company. But the Dolphins are at home and favored by 1.5. This to me is funny because it's like the two teams that folks have claimed all year long they beat up on bad teams and might not show up as well against the good teams, but now they're playing against each other.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff, right? Cowboys flopped in Buffalo last week, and the Dolphins, I mean, yeah, let's be honest here. The Dolphins just put up a beat down on the
They
Jets.
did what they do. Yeah.
They did what they do, right? This game, though, is interesting, and I'm going to use another term here that I used earlier. This is an institutional bet that I'm making on the Miami Dolphins here. And the reason for that is just the coaching, right? The coaching is the big thing here that I'm trusting in the Dolphins, that they are able to take a little something from what the Bills did running the ball against the Cowboys and see if they can do a little bit of that themselves against the Cowboys. And, I'll ride with my guy Mike McDaniels here in this one and take the Miami Dolphins minus 1.5.
I think the Cowboys win this game, and I think they win this game convincingly. I'm not what you're selling, what anybody's selling here with the Dolphins against good teams. And you can say the same thing about the Cowboys, and listen, the cases can be made. They talk about their road record versus the home record, and then it's like yeah, that's how it works. You know what I mean? Teams play better at home than they do on the road, right? But everybody has to listen, I'm no Cowboys fan, right? But I have eyes and ears. I can see what everybody's been doing to the Cowboys, Dak Prescott, trying to find anybody other than Dak to win MVP. And then, of course, when they go to Buffalo, it was clearly going to be a tough spot. Now, it was going to be a tough spot for both teams. Just one happened to be playing at home. Again, that's what home field advantage means, right? And so they were, the Cowboys were very proud of themselves for beating the Eagles and felt pretty comfortable about their position in the league. Whereas the Bills didn't feel comfortable about their position in the league because they shouldn't, because they have to win every single game. Even winning that game, right? Again, you go into the ESPN playoff machine, you play around with that. There are still a ton of scenarios where the Bills, if they drop one game, don't make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And it's that's the difference. It's football. And, same thing goes for hockey, right? Desperation's a little harder to sort of turn into results in hockey. But in the NFL, you can turn desperation into results very easily. And that's what the Bills did to the Cowboys. And if that's what's creating the sort of concept where this Dolphins team should be favored against the Cowboys, then I'm all for it, because it's a team that literally just lost to the Titans less than 2 weeks ago. And I'm supposed to be believing that, given how banged up they were, and because they shut out the Jets. I mean, listen, Zach Wilson fumbles on the 2-yard line, his own 2-yard line early in that game. Again, who knows how that game ends up going otherwise, but okay, Zach Wilson does Zach Wilson things. The Dolphins get ahead. They get the long, they do the thing where they get the long pass. It's yeah, the Dolphins do what they do, and they get that 17-point lead. And from then it's just kind of like Aaron Rodgers shaking his head on the sidelines, right? It's not like the Jets were going to come back. So are they going to be afforded that same sort of 2-play, and we've got ourselves a 17-point lead scenario this week? Can you rely on Tyreek Hill to play in this game and to make it through this game, right? Literally every game he comes hobbling off, right? I think everybody thought he was going to play. The pre-game shows were all look how great he looks, and then all of a sudden he's inactive. And so the Cowboys got kicked in the teeth last week. I mean, quite literally, just on the ground. You have to be more prepared for that. And I realize part of that is, they lost their nose tackle. We talked about DJ Reader, right? They lost their version of DJ Reader in the previous game against the Eagles. But look at the Dolphins offensive line, man. It's beat up. And again, we thought the Jets might be able to take advantage of that. Listen, I don't know what's, the deal is with regards to the Jets defense, as far as are they good? Are they not good? But, if Tua can't, if Tua's getting pressured in this game, we're going to see the same Tua that has had issues against these good teams that were able to pressure him, were able to sort of slow down the Dolphins offense. Even a team like the Titans was able to do that 2 weeks ago. So I love the Cowboys this week. Again, this isn't a cold weather scenario. This isn't against a bruising team necessarily. This is a team that they can score on. Right. And so they're going to be able to go score for score with the Dolphins. They're going to be the team feeling a little bit more desperate in this game. And so that's where I think the difference is. Obviously, just on paper, these, from a rating perspective, these teams are pretty evenly matched. Honestly, the Cowboys, right up until this point, and as I sort of inferred, were rated as the better team. The Dolphins had kind of hit down to a mid 60s, and that's why they were down to, -7.5 in that game against the Jets last week. So yeah, this is honestly, there's a lot of maybe humming and hawing type things here. The only thing that I'm waiting for isn't about uncertainty with regards to the line or anything like that. It's if Tyreek Hill, is in and people, that gets announced and people get excited about that and push this line up. I don't think we're going to get 3 necessarily, but honestly, it's about a money line price for me. Can I get a plus 120 on the money line on the Cowboys? Like, that's what I'm waiting for. Honestly, the line could flip to Cowboys minus 1.5, them be the favorite. I would nod. I'd be like, yep, makes total sense to me. And then I would still bet on the Cowboys. So this is just me waiting to see what the best price I can get, but it's not going to stop me betting on the Cowboys. The Cowboys are going to be in contest. The Cowboys are, this is all Cowboys for me.
I would just, my hesitation with the Cowboys is just my relationship with the Cowboys and me needing them to do stuff. And I'm not saying that is something that anyone else should worry about.
But that's what I mean about like what people
I'm more
are
so
saying
talking
and doing.
about my own relationship with the Cowboys.
And you share that with everybody, right? Like that's why people don't want Dak to be, and nobody's going to come out and say like, I don't want, because of, watching Dak so frequently over the course of his entire career, 5-6 games on primetime every season. And like you said, like the disappointing playoff ends or whatever, like none of that means anything. Like, I'm sorry to tell people, like, this, just none of it means anything. And like, I'm sorry that the Cowboys lost the game. And again, it sounds like I'm a Cowboys fan here. Like, I honestly don't care at all about the Cowboys, outside of the fact that like my job here is to like recognize value and see, what people are saying, how people are saying it, and then sort of using that information. And like, that's the circumstance. People don't like the Cowboys. They are a polarizing team. I get that. And when you consume mainstream media and you hear like all the people trashing the Cowboys every single time, like that's going to seep into it. And then, by the way, like they haven't won, much in the playoffs, if it, barely at all. But like, this is a different team. And so, again, like the Dolphins haven't screwed up yet in sort of a significant way, right? We can obviously point to some of the games that they've lost this season. And so people like, everybody like the Dolphins, this Dolphins team, Mike McDaniel's like everybody's second favorite team because they're exciting and we're all rooting for Tua, and McDaniel is a very interesting, charismatic character. But it's like, yeah, okay, cool. But like, let's go play these games on the football field, right? And none of that stuff, none of that, like those feelings, those emotions should come into betting. And the Cowboys are the better team. And this isn't like a Dolphins team that has some great home field advantage. So I can't build in, 3 points of home field advantage, which is what I would need to build in to make the Dolphins the favorite here.
No, I hear you. And I said I agree with you. And you just got more flustered and went even harder on what you said.
No, I'm dying for you. I'm begging you to change the pick.
It's just hilarious.
I was like,
that was just amazing.
Well, listen, man.
I'm like, I hear what you're saying.
5-10-1, and I'm looking. I'm like, I was 9-7, and it's just
this is the show. That's what the show is. This is what the show is.
I know.
What's the Lebitard sound effect? You don't get the show.
I just want you to have a good record, man.
I hear you, man. I
want you to be profitable.
I hear you.
I want everybody to be profitable. That's all I want.
Yes. So we keep things going here. We got the Browns, who are 2.5-point favorites on the road against the Texans in Houston here. And I'm on Houston at the plus 2.5. Joe Flacco and the Browns continue to roll. I get it. Somehow they pulled out that victory last week with Joe Flacco balling. That is a sentence I actually wrote down and just read out loud into a microphone. Yes, the Texans also pulled out a win late in OT as they won a crazy game at the end as well. This one comes down to the Texans playing at home. I think the Browns struggle a little bit more on the road, even though, you'd have to go back and look at who played QB when, because there's been a lot of different QBs there. And I don't know if we can still be talking about the Browns from a season outlook when Joe Flacco's obviously given them a whole different look. All of that to say, I'm on Houston plus 2.5, just more so because I'd want to take the points with these two teams, more so that I'm so confident that Houston is going to win this game and they're better than the Browns.
Yeah, I mean the Case Keenum thing, right? That's what this is coming down to.
Case Keenum, yeah.
And if you had, obviously if you'd done the same thing with like the Cincinnati Pittsburgh thing, where the point spread gets flipped, which I think was the Texans game last week, right? We'd all understand because this was Houston minus 2.5 yesterday, and then the announcement about CJ Stroud doesn't look like he's going to play. because of the lingering concussion, which is scary now for the Texans going forward, right?
Definitely.
Because it's, normally it's like concussion protocol. Okay, he's probably out for a week and then like he should be fine. That's kind of been the sort of standard, right? And we've gotten a little weird with some cases where the guys have come back the very next week and you're like, oh, okay, apparently concussion protocol is 2 days, right? Like the TJ Watt scenario from last week. Once you get past that first week, right? Concussions are a sketchy, like weird thing, right? Like once you get past that first week and not being able to come back, man, it gets a little bit dicey, right? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like we got Joe Flacco and Case Keenum, like straight out of, a 2014 type of a matchup here. So, mm-hmm. I get why this number has flipped over to 2.5. I can never bet the Browns on the road. Mm-hmm. Browns on the road for me is, it's pretty much an auto fade because the defense, the thing that we like most about the Browns, is their defense at home. And mm-hmm. so, the numbers fall apart. So I just kind of, popping the number into my sheet now, based on the fact that the Texans were, without Stroud last week. What would the number be in this game just based off of that? Because I think we've got a pretty stable rating for Cleveland. As much as they keep winning these games, like they are still kind of rated this like below average team. Mm-hmm. This number would be as high as like Browns -4. Now, Case Keenum, like the Texans got like just absolutely crushed from a rating perspective going into that game, and they won that game outright. So you have to give them a bit of a bump for that. And so that's where you go, okay, well, they're not going to be 4-point home underdogs in this situation. They're going to be closer to 2.5. And so that's with a little bit of a bump here, right? So the Texans are, you always like to use the hard numbers here. Texans are a 30 out of 100 with Case Keenum, with this number sort of, being, associated. Maybe a little bit higher than that if you're giving the Browns a particular bump for beating the Bears last week. But honestly, if you watch that game, right, they're down 10 points into the fourth quarter. It's like, yeah, I'm not, congratulations to the Browns for winning that game. But like the Vikings, the week before, an NFC North team on the road blows it. So it's like, I'm not bumping up the Browns in this, and so I still kind of think there's value on Houston. So maybe we get to 3 here. I don't know if there's going to be a more official announcement about Stroud not playing, and maybe this ticks up where we get a full like +3. That's guess what? Week 16, right? Like another scenario where we're taking a wait and see approach, with +3. On the Texans. So, wait and see, try to get the +3. I think we do actually end up getting that because of the injury report with the Browns, obviously, or with the Texans, excuse me. So yeah, not all that exciting sitting around waiting on numbers, but that's part of the deal here. We got 4 or 5 days between the games. There is going to be line movement, and it would be hard for me to imagine that the line movement goes in the way of the Texans because, prior to pulling that game off, by the way, last week, speaking of 10+ point deficits, they didn't look all that great either. So, this is the cards that we're dealt here with some of these games in week 16.
Yeah, here we are wrapping up the season, and we got the Nick Mullins and Case Keenums and Joe Flacco's and all that fun stuff. But yes, Houston +2.5 as we move on to the Lions, who are 3.5-point favorites in Minnesota against the aforementioned Vikings. The Nick Mullins experience was not a fun ride at all last week. As mentioned earlier in the pod, they should have won. But guess what? Nick Mullins is not Jalen Hurts, and they cannot execute the tush push nearly as well as Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. They lose in OT. Meanwhile, the Lions roll, and it has people asking, where has this Lions team been for the last few weeks, right? Who knew that was still a thing? But now here we are, and I don't like it, but the Lions at 3.5-point favorites on the road, like I don't really like it, but I need to know more about the Vikings and what experience I'd be signing myself up for this week at the QB position.
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously signing up for the Nick Mullins experience, which, I mean, given any, like, wait 2 seconds and, like, you're going to get either, like, a really great play or a catastrophic play. And honestly, that's not what I want out of my backup quarterback, right? I want Drew Lock. And I know that's sort of a crazy thing to say, but, like, I thought Drew Lock was awesome on Monday night. And, like, the term awesome is, has to be relative. This isn't, oh man, he was slinging it all over the field, like he was making great plays. It's like, no,
that's not the ask.
No, that's not the ask. You're just trying to not bleep it up. right? And Nick Mullins did everything he could to bleep that up in that game. And so from a market perspective, this game is like there's a turf war going on right now. And it's every time this number goes to plus 3.5, the Vikings get bet. And every time the number goes to 3, which it has a couple of different times this week, the Lions get bet. Right. So it's honestly depending on like what price is currently available. And as of like Wednesday morning, like the plus 3.5 is sort of the more prevalent number. So you're in line with a group that thinks that the Vikings plus 3.5 is the right side in this game. The funny thing is like with the Vikings, obviously it's a play to play situation with regards to, what to expect from them. But like Detroit, it's a game to game situation. When we talk about, teams rating and we assign sort of an out number, and that's always the average of what we sort of expect. But like we also have a range for that team, right? So if the Lions average is like 59, 60 out of 100, their range is anywhere from 50 to 70. And we've seen the 70 version of the Lions, right? Like last week, for example, was the 70 version of the Lions. And the week before that was the 50 version of the Lions. So like we don't often get that middle version of the Detroit Lions, right? I think we get sort of a slightly better than average version from, the Lions, isn't better than their average. And what that means is indoors, being able to challenge the Vikings secondary, where, the Vikings, have this defense where they've been blitzing a ton this season. And sometimes they've taken that off to a degree, but they blitz a ton. And you sort of wonder, like, why are you blitzing the most in the league? And I think we saw last week that the fact that the secondary has basically no ball skills.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, yeah, if we could just blitz and like take the heat off of the secondary, having to play deep balls down the field, we will, take our chances with hot routes and tackling. And, because, every team has a skill set, right? And if the Vikings skill set from their secondary is tackling, then you're going to keep everything underneath. How do you keep everything underneath? You blitz and you force hot reads and dump offs and, screen passes and stuff like that, right? So, can the Lions take advantage of that with their offensive line being as healthy as it's been all season? Yeah. This isn't going outdoors for Jared Goff, right? This is an indoors, type matchup. This is, a Lions team that, offensive line is super healthy. Their skill position guys are super healthy. They can beat you in the short intermediate. They can beat you going deep, right? Jameson Williams stretching the defense. All of a sudden Josh Reynolds is like an actual productive receiver in the NFL. So, again, not knowing what I'm going to get, or honestly not having any confidence in Nick Mullins and what we're going to get on that side, has me thinking that I can rely more on the Lions in this game. And I know it's a road game and usually something that we'd rather sort of play against here, just in general in the NFL. At 3.5, like, no, I'm not going to just like line up to bet the 3.5. I'm going to wait and see if the 3 comes back. So again, week 16 on a Wednesday, guess what we're doing? We're going to take a wait and see approach. We're going to grab the Lions at -3 whenever we can get it. And, when it comes to a wait and see approach, didn't end up mattering, almost mattered on Monday night. But the whole premise for Monday night's game between Seattle and Philadelphia was you got to know who the quarterbacks are in the matchup. So wait and see. So, I write an article on Monday morning and, we were still 12 hours away from knowing who the quarterbacks are. That game ended up closing. There were some +6s available, but widely available +5.5. With the Eagles up 4 in that game. If you have 5, you're sitting pretty. You don't care what happens in that last drive, right? But if you have 3.5, like you needed a Drew Lock, excellent throw. So like this stuff matters. So don't just listen to this and be like, okay, -3.5, like I'm in. You don't have to bet the game, by the way. And if we never get -3 with Detroit, like that's fine. You can bet it live. Maybe that, that sort of becomes an option. Listen, there could be some good Nick Mullins moments early, especially in the script, right? I think their best drive last week was within the script. I think they scored a touchdown on their first drive. Take a wait and see approach right up through the first quarter if you have to in this game, because the longer the game is going to go, the worse Nick Mullins is going to get.
Yes, the Nick Mullins experience. Don't you dare miss it. We keep it moving here from Detroit to me being on the Jags, which is a tough go for sure. But I will explain. Trevor Lawrence, I feel like Trevor Lawrence gets a bit of a pass from the greater football world, and I don't really understand why. Because when you really lock in and watch him, and especially on Monday night, that was a bad watch. Bad clock management, bad turnovers, just not good throws downright at certain moments. Horrible look for him in the Jags. But, I'll try and think maybe that was the Ravens D. Maybe that's a bit of the Ravens defense. I don't know. Bottom line is, tough look last week for the Jags. Now they head into Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay, as I mentioned, it's a team that I've struggled with this whole season. Baker's balling when I'm rolling with them. He's balling when I'm not rolling with them.
Right.
And balling when I'm against them. Sure. Somehow they're 7-7. Can't say I saw that coming this season, but you know what? We did talk about it earlier on this pod. I'm on Jacksonville +1 here. And the reason being is just because I feel like the Jags need this dub as their division. Things are getting a little spicy here in their division. And I think they need this win.
Yeah, I mean, great. Like, could have used it last week, could have used it the week before, right? Like, we're into that part of the season. If you must win, you must not be very good. And honestly, well, first of all, we have to talk about the idea about this line, right? And the idea of Trevor Lawrence potentially not playing in this game, right? So you can talk about Trevor Lawrence, and it's like, yeah, okay, but what if we get CJ Beathard?
Entered protocol. Well, if CJ Beathard's involved, I'm not involved in the Jags. I'm saying right now on this pod so people can know that whatever the line is, and if CJ Beathard is involved, I'm not on the Jags.
Right. And so, okay, so how do we play this market? And so we got luckily we have sort of an idea of what the market's going to do with the idea of CJ Beathard playing in this game, because we had that scenario 2 weeks ago, leading up to the game against Cleveland. And against Cleveland, Beathard was, we thought Beathard might come in, and then he didn't, and a beat up Trevor Lawrence, lack of mobility type of thing, right? We talked about this going into last game, what are we supposed to get out of the Jags given where their rating finished, even with Lawrence in that game? And their rating with Lawrence in that game was a 40 out of 100, because it was like, well, he's going to be compromised. This is a really bad spot for Jacksonville to come in and play. If CJ Beathard had played in that game, it would be lower than 40, right? It would be probably something in the mid to low 30s. And that was coming off of just one loss, where that game was competitive, and they probably maybe win that, the game against the Bengals if Lawrence doesn't get hurt in the fourth quarter. What about this version of the Jags that we've seen over these last 3 weeks that would make you even think it would be as high as the mid 30s with CJ Beathard, right? Like, wouldn't it have to be kind of in the low 30s with CJ Beathard? So let's put them in as like a 32 out of 100, right? Let's downgrade them off of 2 losses and with CJ Beathard in. Like, what would the point spread be? Point spread would be Tampa Bay minus 4.2. So somewhere between -4 and 4.5. And that's before upgrading the Buccaneers for waltzing into Green Bay last week, and looking awesome. So we might even have sort of a higher number. So I would lean to 4.5 as my CJ Beathard projected number in this game. That's that's considerably different than essentially a pick 'em right now, right? So definitely. you can bet the Bucs right now. If CJ Beathard plays, you're getting all kinds of closing line value. Well, let's say a Trevor Lawrence plays, right? Well, I don't know that we can rate them as high as we had them last week. Or when I say we, I mean the market, not me specifically, because I was on the Ravens, because I'm not buying the Jaguars rating as it is right now. So that number ended up closing, admittedly, Baltimore -4. So we got to a point where the closing number kind of put Jacksonville around 53 out of 100. Which at this point, like, that's a pretty fair number, right? Like, you're slightly above, honestly, they're leading the division, or I guess they're now tied for the lead in the division, but they've led the division all season long. And so you have to give them some credit for that. But like, every time they've tried to have a step up in weight class, like, it's gone badly. So like 53 out of 100 seems like a pretty fair number. So if we pop 53 out of 100 into the rating machine, we get Jags -1.5 on the road against Tampa. Again, that's before upgrading Tampa a little bit for just playing really good football lately. Yeah. So we'll pop them up a little bit, and that's how we get to basically a pick 'em in this game. So I think you bet this now at Tampa -1, knowing that honestly there isn't a difference really between -1 and +1, right? The only difference is if this ends up in a tie, and of course, because I mentioned that, it'll probably end as a tie. But like, Tampa needs this game just as much as the Jags do from a quote unquote motivational standpoint. They are the odds-on favorite to win the division right now, and they're just playing better football. So why wouldn't you want Tampa at a pick 'em when kind of the worst case scenario, I think, now listen, maybe Trevor Lawrence gets a clean bill of health and the line goes to, like, I don't know, 2.5. Sure, that doesn't really do all that much. Maybe it goes to 3, at which point, honestly, I'm betting the Buccaneers at +3 again on top of what I'm already going to have. But right now, you can get pick'em here with the Bucs, and it might end up closing -4, -4.5, because the concussion protocol, again, we don't know, right? And the idea that Sunday night game, he finishes that game, and then Monday they put him into protocol, and the sort of after, there's a full sort of day of after effects where it wasn't off of a big hit, and we're not even really sure what the effects were. This was just how you feeling, Trevor? And it's bad. That's his answer on Monday. Whereas a guy can get absolutely leveled on Sunday. They take him out of the game. He doesn't come back in. They put him in concussion protocol. He can come back on Monday and be actually, I feel pretty good. Kind of dodged a bullet. There's these two different scenarios here, right? And so in this scenario, he's already admitted that he is not feeling well. And so I just don't see there, how betting on the Buccaneers here right now is necessarily all that bad of idea, when I think the worst case scenario is you bet on the Bucs at -1. Lawrence plays, the line moves to maybe, again, like I said, best case scenario or most likely scenario is Jags -1.5, -2. Okay, I don't really care that I've lost that value necessarily, when the alternative is getting a pick'em on a number that could be as high as 4 or 4, or at least I think should be 4 or 4.5. I don't know that it would actually go that high. So I think there's value coming and going here. And any loss in value isn't as significant as the gain in value if CJ Beathard ends up playing in this game, because honestly, right now, I think the Buccaneers are the better team. So give me the Bucs. Give me, again, watch the Jags defense. Is this a defense that I think is going to fluster Baker Mayfield via pressure? No, via secondary play. You saw Chris Collinsworth talking about how good the backup guys for the Jags secondary was, but the reality is they are backups, right? They have these guys missing that were intended to be starters, and that's cool for your depth later on, but that's going to be problematic when you have guys like Mike Evans. And Chris Godwin had a nice game last week. And by the way, Rachaad White is sort of sneaky, all of a sudden awesome from a running back position as a young, athletic guy. And anybody following this podcast for the last 2 years, we've been begging for more Rachaad White and less Leonard Fournette. We're finally getting that this season. And guess what? The Bucs are probably going to end up winning their division now. Honestly, I would say because of it.
Yeah, no, pick has been changed. Tampa Bay -1. This for me also on top of what you said. I just, it's not difficult to talk into what we think could be the better team at home and the value of who could be the QB for the Jags.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff there for sure with the 1-point spread, basically a pick'em. We head to another pick'em game involving the Colts at the Falcons. And this one is super interesting to me because we look at it and I think did Ritter get benched again? Is this where we're at here with the Atlanta Falcons?
Yeah.
The season for them has just been with Mr. Arthur Smith and Ritter and how do they use their weapons and all this fun stuff. It's been a weird season. Yet they are right there with the aforementioned Bucs in that very crappy division. An amazing loss, as you called it last week, the Falcons losing to the Panthers. Now the Falcons head back home. Heineke getting in there, and hopefully you lose a couple of the big red zone turnover from your man's Desmond Ritter. But either way, the Colts are playing really nice as well. This is a tough one. I'm starting here on the Falcons, but again, in these mid-offs, I'm not really confident in either of these teams.
Yeah.
So, here we are. Atlanta -1.
Yeah, it's funny. So, listen, a lot of people anoint themselves like the prince of props and the total, king or whatever, all this BS. I honestly, I think I'm the best reverse jinxer in the world, right? I don't overuse it, but when I do, you're in trouble. And I threw out a tweet last week about Desmond Ritter playing a perfect, clean game on the road in the rain.
Yeah,
and because desperate times are calling for desperate measures, as we needed the Panthers to cover desperately, especially after the Vikings fiasco of the day before. And it sure enough, almost immediately, or 10, 15 minutes later, I think it was, he throws that interception. And of course, you still need Bryce Young to literally do anything. And that's, I think, the problem with the Panthers kind of going forward. But when it comes to the Falcons here, This line was -1.5 for the Colts. And I looked at it and I was like, well, that can't be correct because we just had the Colts as -1 favorites at home to Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't tell me that, Pittsburgh is necessarily better than the Falcons. As much as listen, I have never liked, we talk about every week. I've never liked the Falcons. Occasionally bet on them. Obviously, the one thing with the Falcons is you have to be very, unlike that Tampa Jacksonville game, like you have to be very aware of whether you're getting 1 point or not getting 1 point, because all these games with the Falcons turn into it's 17-16 and somebody's trying to go for a 2 or a field goal or something like that, right? It's like, nobody ever gets or gives 3 points essentially with the Falcons. Which, again, one of the reasons why we liked the Panthers last week, getting a full 3 points against them. So at +1.5, I just look at it, I was like, that I'm sorry, that can't be right. And I guess we're giving the Colts all kinds of credit for beating Mitch Trubisky at home, but think about that sentence. That sentence doesn't really make any sense. Mm-hmm. And then sure enough, I wake up here Wednesday morning and the favorite has flipped to Atlanta -1, right? So the good news is I know what I'm doing as far as what a line should be. Bad news is I didn't bet the Falcons because I'm not into Taylor Heineke as sick, they've gone from Ritter to Taylor Heineke, get me in on that train. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I'm not excited about it. So the Falcons are the side for me if I had to make a bet on this. But I don't want to bet on Arthur Smith. I've never really wanted to bet on Arthur Smith this season. I'd rather bet on Shane Steichen. It's an indoor game. This isn't a scenario where it's going to be particularly uncomfortable for the Colts offense. Where the discomfort kind of comes in is no Michael Pittman. Maybe who knows whether we're getting Jonathan Taylor back, a Zach Moss back, what combination of those two guys are in, and is that even going to matter? Because the Colts ran the ball fine with their third and fourth string guys against Pittsburgh. So I know you've got to make a pick here, and I'm not going to necessarily talk you out of Atlanta based on the market stuff that I just talked about, but I don't really want anything to do with this game.
No, I hear you.
So, it's Atlanta, I guess, but I don't know. Let's put in a lot of faith in the Falcons, who, again, we talked about last week, are pretty banged up on the offensive and defensive line. And honestly, win, lose, or draw, I can't take anything from that rain fiasco last week. That was a janky, messed up, weather game. And that's not what we're going to get this week. And that's probably good for the Falcons. So, you know what I mean? I know I'm saying multiple things here. Good for the Colts, good for the Falcons. I think there's maybe slightly more good for the Falcons in this game. And I think that's why they're the slight favorite right now, which is what I would have made them all along.
Nope, totally got you. Totally with you. Indeed. We move on to the Seahawks, who are 3-point favorites in Tennessee against the Titans. Huge win for Drew Lock and company on Monday Night Football against the Eagles. But now they go on the road, and the ask is for them to win by more than 3. That's a tough spot for me to be taking here. And, Tennessee, been in this position before, where I'm taking Tennessee as a home dog, getting a field goal. Kind of like that spot. The Seahawks 2-5 on the road this season. Not too good. Not sure if Geno's going to be back. Are we still getting Drew Lock? Not really sure on that as well. But overall, Tennessee plus the points, that's where I'm going to be living.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. It's funny, right? Because we go into that game on Monday and they're like, all right, it's going to be Drew Lock, it's going to be Geno Smith. Oh God, there's some sort of massive difference between the two. And the reality is I don't think there is a massive difference.
Yeah.
Right? I do not think. I don't know that there was a difference a year and a half ago when Geno Smith edged him out in training camp and got the starting job. I don't know that there was a difference between the two when Geno Smith played really well, or at least perceptively well in the first 10 games of that season. I don't think there was much of a difference when Geno Smith didn't play very well in the back half of last season.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a difference between Geno Smith and Drew Lock, this season. Like I said, I thought he played really well. Underdog role. What do you want to do? You don't want to turn the ball over. Look at all these guys who come in, and we could go and name 17 to 20 quarterbacks who would not have won that game, would not have even been competitive in that game, who are starting in the NFL this week than Drew Lock was in that game, because he didn't throw any interceptions. They didn't ask him to throw deep. The whole point of, and this is worthwhile when it comes to handicapping, especially backup quarterbacks, and what our expectations are with regards to backup quarterbacks. Can they keep the game close? Because the whole idea is to keep, you hear coaches talk about it. Keep the game close, get us to the fourth quarter, get us honestly one drive at the end of the game when fourth down isn't a punting situation. It's a get to go for it situation. And so you get to go from needing 3.4 yards per play to just 2.51 yards per play, right? Which, like, I know that doesn't sound like much, but you can frame it this way, right? 3 plays to get 10 yards or 4 plays to get 10 yards. What's easier? Especially when a team is playing not necessarily a prevent defense necessarily, but they're willing to allow things that are they're playing back essentially.
Yeah,
willing to allow stuff in front of them. And so, like, that's what the Seahawks did. They did just enough. And as much as I hate Pete Carroll because he everything you can screw up in a small way, whether it's timeout, not taking a 10-second runoff when you're about to have a 3rd and 14 at the end of the first half, just willfully giving the Eagles the ball back with 10 more seconds than they should have. Like, it's this tiny stuff that, like, doesn't even get talked about on the broadcast, where, like, if you're paying close attention, you're like, God, like, these things are going to add up to you. But the point is like, they're not the underdog this time around. But the issue for me is Ryan Tannehill going to play in this game and be the underdog that Drew Lock was last week? Not turn the ball over, right? Use his running game, not being asked to throw the ball deep, using the 1 or 2 receivers that he has that can make plays. In this case, DeAndre Hopkins in the sort of DK Metcalf role. Or is it going to be Malik Willis? Because that seems to be sort of the murmurs that are coming out of Tennessee that it's going. Because why would you play Ryan Tannehill at this point? Because, Derrick Henry, one of the quotes from him, after the game last week, obviously, he said, he's like, we kind of, and we talked about this. And it was nice that he framed it this way. He's like, we kind of talked ourselves into, like, maybe if we run the table, we can squeak into the playoffs. And he's like, but now it sort of feels like, it's over. And that's like a pretty telling thing when you're trying to, like, read, how a team feels coming down the stretch.
Yeah.
So if it's kind of over, which last year you'll recall, like, it wasn't over. They had, they Tannehill went out. Obviously, they didn't have Levis yet, and but they had Malik Willis, and they're like, okay, like, we can still make the playoffs, right? They could have made the playoffs coming down to that very last game against the Jags, but Malik Willis, they ended up going to Josh Dobbs because Malik Willis wasn't good enough. Do I think Malik Willis is all of a sudden going to be good enough in this game? I do not, right? And so that's where I think this number comes in, because I look at it, and, there's one of two ways you can look at it. Does Seattle get a massive upgrade because Drew Lock isn't any different than Geno Smith, and they get an upgrade to about the league average team that we have talked about the Seahawks being all season long, right? Which is quite literally 50 out of 100. Okay, if we go to that, we bump them all the way back because, previously we had them getting downgraded because of Drew Lock, because they closed 15.5 in San Francisco and they closed, 5.5, 6 at home against Philadelphia. Well, like, those are both incorrect numbers, right? Like, Seattle ended up covering that big number against San Francisco. And of course, they ended up covering and winning outright last week. So you change that number, you put them right back to even. You say, you know what, Drew Lock, Geno Smith, who cares? Don't care who plays. They're about the same. Like, what's the number that you kind of come up with? And you come up with about 3.4, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's where this number comes from. But I haven't done anything to the Titans yet to reflect the fact that I don't think that Malik Willis is any good. So I think this is a fair kind of number if Ryan Tannehill plays. But now that we're creeping upwards here, to, up from by the way, it's open -2.5. We've crept up to -3. I think we can go a little bit further, -3.5, -4 potentially with Malik Willis. And moreover, like, I don't know that there's a number that I don't want to fade Malik Willis with at this point, right? And the Titans defense and the fact that they allowed what they did to Case Keenum in that fourth quarter, right? But it's like, again, this is a really bad spot for Seattle. I can't deny that a short week on the road, jump and hug game, right, where we all of a sudden like Drew Lock. I can't believe I've come to that conclusion in my life where I'm praising Drew Lock both as a person and as a football player. But like, that's where we are. So like 3, I think is just a really fair number that could go either way. It's more just like, do you want to have a ticket on the Titans going, all right, Malik Willis, like, let's do this thing with a team that has already sort of publicly said, or at least their leader on offense, Derrick Henry, and he said, like, oh yeah, it kind of feels over. It's like, I don't want that team. I don't want Malik Willis. I don't want the team that has admitted that it's over.
No, totally understand where you're coming from here. Pick has been changed. Seattle -3 on the road. We continue on with the Commanders on the road in New York against the Jets. Jets laying 3 points, and it's just funny to see that as the Jets laying 3 points because, like, wait, is Aaron Rodgers coming back? No. We got, I don't know. On the other side, we got, is that Jacoby Brissett's music I heard last week for the Commanders? Like, what is happening here? I say all that to say, somehow I wrote that I'm on Jacoby Brissett and the Commanders at +3, just because I'm looking at this and thinking, I don't know what to make of the Jets at this point. Do the Jets know what to make of the Jets at this point? You know, like the quarterback situation couldn't be like, for as insane as the quarterback situation is in the entire NFL,
right?
The Jets are still like the weirdest hang ever because there's so much going on, so much uncertainty. Who wants to play? Who's healthy enough to play? It's just a tough spot for sure. Reluctantly, I'm on the Commanders +3 here because you're giving me points. I'll take the points in this one.
Well, if I thought we were getting Jacoby Brissett, I could be talked into Washington because of what we saw, obviously, at the end of that game where, I mean, Ron Rivera.
Yeah.
What are we doing, man? Like, he doesn't go for 2.
He's in Cancun mode, man.
Well, he's not even like Cancun mode ever implies that there was a mode where he was like locked in and had it figured out. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh yeah, you know, they've given up because no, he's just clueless. Mm-hmm. At least 4 times, maybe 5 times, he's had a situation this season where he was supposed to go for 2 and he didn't. And it happened again last week. And then, of course, they get the PAT blocked anyway. So they end up they were down 8 points regardless. And it was just so perfect because it was like, you know, the PAT is not a guaranteed 1 point, right? And it's like, and it had to literally be jammed right in his face that the PAT is not a guaranteed 1 point. It is not 100%, you know, probability that a team kicks and gets the extra point, which is the fundamental argument for like why you wouldn't, you know, the first argument is to go for it is that like overtime doesn't mean you win the game. Overtime means you're 50-50 chance at winning the game. By the way, they were the underdogs, so you don't want to go to overtime anyway because you're not a 50-50 chance to win. You're probably closer at best to 60-40, but anyway, we can have that conversation. If anybody even needs, and that's the depressing part because I think at this point, everybody's already figured out you're supposed to go for 2. Late when you're down 14, you score a touchdown, you're down 8, like you are supposed to go for 2. Like it's maybe like a handful of announcers because they only watch 1 game a week and they golf the rest of the week, presumably because they're not paying attention to anything that else is happening in the rest of the league. And then like just people who are like, I don't know, 60 years or older and like don't want to understand math. So all that is to say, there's no point in starting Jacoby Brissett. It's the same thing as Ryan Tannehill, right? Like, why? And Sam Howell's not injured. You just play Sam Howell the rest of the season. He gets 3 more games of experience and like, okay. And I think that's what they've announced that they're going to do. Mm-hmm. So now it's, do I want Sam Howell and everything else that's going on with the Commanders on the road? And they're like, oh, I'm getting 3 points. It's like, yeah, cool. But this defense is awful. There was I should really have it up to cite it, but there was a gentleman who graded all the cornerbacks in the league, and the Commanders literally had 2 of like the 3 worst corners in the league. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to, how do we judge Zach Wilson? Are we going to judge him by last week? That's, that situation against the Dolphins and apply that to this situation? Or are we going to apply the week before against the Texans, where as much as the Texans have a, 3-4 game better record than the Commanders, Texans are an awfully similar team to the Commanders. Shaky defense, obviously a quarterback who throws, no running game. So it's all throwing from the quarterback. In the case of the Texans, a dome team. But like Sam Howell at home, especially in any time of rain scenario, has been just awful. Think Buffalo game. Think that Dolphins game that they themselves played 2 weeks ago, right? Like it's like penalizing the Jets for getting blown out by the Dolphins when the Commanders literally did it 3 weeks ago. And so it's like, okay, which scenario do I want? Do I want Zach Wilson against maybe the worst defense in the entire league, only giving 3, when the best unit by far on the field, who has shown that they might not be able to take advantage of of good offenses, but they certainly can take advantage of bad quarterbacks, especially in bad scenarios. Like there's a reason this is 3, and that like the world isn't all just lining up and taking the Commanders here just because we're getting 3 points against the Jets. Like the Jets can win this game by more than 3 points. In fact, they probably will. And you know what I mean? And that's the thing that infuriates everybody about the Jets and about Zach Wilson and about the fact that they didn't have Aaron Rodgers or any sort of competent, consistent quarterback this season, is because outside of the quarterback play, every, 2 out of every 3 games, this is a really good team, or sort of like has the structure of a really good team. So yeah, I think, it's uncomfortable, but like there's kind of a reason why some of these spreads are the way that they are. When you think, okay, 2 bad teams are going to take the points, it's like, well, it's actually 1 bad unit for the Jets and 2 bad units for the Commanders, who I thought were going to be able to move the ball against the Rams last week and didn't until Jacoby Brissett came in. And is that because the Rams had such a big lead that they were playing something of a prevent defense and they weren't super locked in and motivational stuff, et cetera, right? Hoping for sloppy weather. Give me the Jets here, minus 3 points.
I got you. The pick has been changed. Jets -3. We keep going here to the crappy Panthers at home hosting the Packers. Packers 5-point favorites on the road. The Panthers got their win last week. Every week, every win for them is going to be a celebration. The Packers need a bounce back after they got crushed last week. What better chance to have a bounce back than facing the Panthers? Give me the Packers -5, and I'm not going to watch this game at all.
Totally fair. So yeah, we got out of Dodge with a victory with Carolina last week, and that was sweet. And because that was a contest play for me, guess who watched every single play of Falcons Panthers last week? I did. And we always talk about how we have to be honest with ourselves about winning and losing bets and whether we would want to have this experience again. And to be honest with you, I would not like to have this experience again. The Falcons were able to move the ball when they actually ran sort of interesting plays, right? Some misdirection type stuff, some, throwback type stuff, et cetera, et cetera. We already know what the Falcons' issue is. They literally don't use their good players. Bijan Robinson doesn't get used. All of a sudden, Tyler Algier is getting 20 carries. I get, in a way, the scenario, because when Bijan did get used, I think he fumbled. And maybe he's just not a rain guy. I don't know, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is nothing about that game made me go, yep, Panthers the rest of the way. Let's start hitting them as underdogs as many times as we possibly can. I think the Packers, you mentioned sort of the concept of a bounce back situation here. Again, another week goes by, maybe they get a little bit healthier. We talked about all the health issues that they potentially would have against Tampa Bay, and sure enough, right, a lot of those guys didn't play. Aaron Jones ended up playing, which imagine Aaron Jones actually playing in a football game. I think the scenario where the Packers, who do all of that sort of misdirection, they have plays, right? Yep. They have interesting plays instead of hey, let's just run off tackle for the 37th time. I think they're going to be able to move the ball just enough against the Panthers defense. This isn't a dome team going on the road in crappy weather the way the Falcons were. So this isn't the same situation as last week. We are getting, I think, still a little bit of a discount here on the Packers, because I think people looked at the Panthers and were competitive defense, et cetera, can keep this game close. Bryce Young did stuff on that last drive. And what he did, honestly, was he just threw the ball to space, where, you spend 3 quarters trying to hit guys in stride and do all this stuff that in the rain, just isn't going to work. But what you can do in the rain is throw the ball into space and have your guy cut before the cornerback cuts, and he can run underneath kind of these lollipop passes. I don't know. Listen, it's the weather. We're not going to predict the weather here. I don't think the Packers are going to be affected by weather the same way that the Falcons were last week. And if there is no weather in Carolina and it's fine, I think the Packers can go and get enough, go up and down, get enough points on this Panthers team that they're not going to be able to compete and keep up in the same way that they have had much through the rest of the season. This line opened at 4, and I couldn't have bet this thing hard enough, off the hop. Now up to 5. There you can see some buyback, and it's a lot of the times when I think something is really obvious, I'm kind of looking for resistance. Somebody tell me you like the Panthers, because obviously when it's kind of too good to be true, it often is. Somebody tell me you like the Panthers here so that I can feel better about this. And seeing some money come in a little bit here on the Panthers, I am fine with that. I think the Packers roll Carolina in this game and get back on track, win their last 3 games, and make the playoffs.
Yeah, would be a very good start for the Packers' run to the playoffs for sure. As we continue on with the Cards, who are in Chicago to take on the Bears. Bears at home is 4.5-point favorites. I cannot lay 4.5 points with the Bears. Can't do it, won't do it. I'm just not liking that at all. So give me the Arizona Cardinals here, who were able to move the ball around against the Niners for a little bit, and then the Niners are just better. So plus 4.5, cool. I'll take those points with the Cardinals.
Yeah, and the Cardinals have like a reliable, sort of move the ball couple of options, right? With James Conner and Trey McBride. I think Trey McBride is like top 5 tight end in the NFL, especially with like the fantasy death of Travis Kelce. The weather, you go, okay, Chicago, like Arizona team going to Chicago, not ideal. The weather actually looks pretty good in Chicago. Speaking of trying to predict the weather, right? It's like, it doesn't seem to be, it's not going to be snowing. It's not going to be this, that, or whatever. We'll see. That could obviously change in the next 5 days. That would be my only sort of hesitancy with regards to the Cardinals, because honestly, I think these teams pretty damn similar, right? Like, isn't Justin Fields and Kyler Murray just kind of the same thing at this point? And the difference being, obviously, the Bears have quite a bit, a lot better defense than the Cardinals have. But listen, the Cardinals, keep taking fire here from teams like the Rams and the 49ers, especially at home, when like the Rams and 49ers are going to always have success in Arizona. Like, it's not like Arizona has really any kind of home field advantage whatsoever. So, I think this sets up a lot like the Steelers game from a couple of weeks ago. And like, that was terrible weather. They literally stopped the game 2 different times because of, there was like lightning, and obviously there's storming and rain and all of that kind of stuff, right? So like the Cardinals just did this against Pittsburgh, and they did it fine. They dominated. They ran the ball. They were able to have just enough of a passing game. I think all of this is to say, right, these teams aren't that different, and one team's favored by 4.5 points.
Yeah.
Right. If this game was in Arizona and Arizona was a minus 4.5 point favorite, guess what we'd be doing? Be taking Chicago. Right. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to take Arizona here. I'm going to grin and bear it. And I think there's enough that they can do to keep this game close against a Bears team that, like, they're playing a lot of close games. Right. Like, that's kind of what they do.
Definitely. Speaking of close games, the Patriots almost sort of kept it interesting for a bit against the Chiefs last week. Showed signs of life, we'll say. Meanwhile, the Broncos sort of fell apart last week against the Detroit Lions. Now the Broncos are hosting said Patriots in Denver and favored by 7 points. This is a tough one, and I don't know what the Pats are doing in terms of like long term. Is Belichick there? Are they trying to tank? Are they trying to make sure, like, tanking is a weird concept to try to place on an NFL team, as we've discussed time and time again. But I feel like in this instance, I think the Pats can keep this game close. I don't know if they win this game. I feel like the Broncos will do the job and win, but give me the Patriots to kind of keep it close here at 7.
Yeah, I mean, certainly at 7, you're getting a little frisky with your point spread here. There's some 7. Let's see what it is. 7 minus 118. So at minus 118, like $8 more than a standard minus 110 bet to get a key number like 7. Very reasonable sort of play here. Lines open 5.5 and has ticked up, which honestly is a little bit, it's not surprising, but it is surprising. I'll put it this way: like, I have the number at 7. Based on, previous point spreads, right? Denver gets blown off the planet on Saturday night. And so you go, okay, we should probably knock that down a little bit. And like you mentioned, New England keeps that game sort of interesting, competitive, at least from a point spread perspective. But it was interesting that Kansas City wins that game by 10. That line toggled between sort of 7.5 and 9.5. And I think like closed at 10 right at the very end, right? So like no one came in on Kansas City at minus 10. Right? You don't wait all week and be like, yeah, now I'm into it at minus 10, right? Like, so everybody who bet on Kansas City won that game. You might have gotten a push with New England if you had bet plus 10 at the very last second. Thing is, like, they kept that game close because of 2 interceptions of Patrick Mahomes, and both of those interceptions were pretty much flukes, right? They were like good bounce type scenarios, right? And like Bailey Zappi's going to do the thing. Like Hunter Henry is just I guess a really good bet for an anytime touchdown every single game. We had him against, in the Pittsburgh game, but he gets another one last week against Kansas City. There might be some snow, I think, in the, speaking of trying to predict the weather, there might be some snow in the forecast here. Who knows what that means, right? Does it mean it actually stays? Does it have any effect on the game whatsoever, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah. So I bet it at minus 5.5 when that opened, because again, my projection had it at 7. Now that we're at 7, you have to have the conversation about, like, are the Broncos the type of team that you can rely to win by 2 scores? And they have, like they did against Cleveland a couple of weeks ago. But is it something that you think is going to happen sort of, 55% of the time or more? And even me, who's like, I think Denver wins the rest of their games. I think they make the playoffs. I think Sean Payton is still eligible for Coach of the Year, assuming that sort of happens. So I'm still high on the Broncos going forward. But like all of that highness on the Broncos, all of that sort of, interest in the Broncos, like none of that had anything to do with the idea of covering a big number. And so that's the thing that you have to remember when you're thinking like, okay, am I going to just bet the Broncos every game, for the rest of the season? It's like, no, we've hit the point here with the Broncos. They got a game against the Chargers coming up. I think Vegas to end the season on the road, right? I think they're going to be favored in all of those games. The Vegas one might be a little bit dicey because they are on the road. It's like, yeah, do I want to just keep laying points with the Broncos like over and over and over again here? Like, I kind of don't. I just kind of want them to win the game and sort of get into the playoffs, cash, playoff, make playoff bets and have Peyton maybe be sort of considered a Coach of the Year candidate with the turnaround that they've had midway through the season. So yeah, I'm certainly not going to talk you out of the Patriots +7 here, especially assuming if that gets, sort of a widely available, and especially if that gets to like -110. But even at -118, which is available right now, that's still, a viable play on a key number for me.
Oh, I got you. Interesting game for sure, which leads us perfectly into Christmas Day. We got 3 Christmas Day games here. First off, we start with the Raiders at the Chiefs. We were just talking about the Chiefs, right? And their win by 10 points. And I think last week on the pod, the discussion was at 9.5. I'm reluctantly taking the Chiefs. At 10, I'd have to start thinking about taking the Patriots. And now we're looking at a 10-point spread against the Raiders. So now you're ranking how good do I think the Raiders are versus the Patriots, and obviously the Chiefs going from road to home, all that fun stuff. But I'm going to keep it real and do what I normally do here and lay to 10 points with the Chiefs. In part, though, because the Raiders, the interesting part too for the Raiders is they're going from a Thursday night game to a Monday night game, which is, normally I want to say a lot of time the rest. But I feel like, Max Crosby and company might have had some fun this week. If there's a week you're going to have a little fun, it's after you put up 63 points and, you get to sit up on stage with the cigars afterwards. I don't know. This will be an interesting game. Christmas Day, who knows how either team reacts to any of that stuff. I don't really know. But I'm laying the 10 points with the Chiefs, and I'll take a push at 10, knowing that, that's a lot of points to be laying with the Chiefs team that don't really deserve to be laying 10 points against anyone.
Well, yeah, I actually think the number is fair here, and that's with the downgrade of the Chiefs that we saw going into last week, because that was the thing, right? The Chiefs got downgraded to the point where a 10-point win wasn't just a push, right? It was a cover for anybody who sort of noticed that the Chiefs had been downgraded, and that's why we talk about ratings. Right? Because it's easy to just say, okay, the Chiefs should be, heavily favored against the Patriots last week, and knowing the difference between 7.5 and 10 and what that means in the marketplace, right? And so seeing that was 7.5 at one point, and knowing like, okay, how do I apply this to, the math, and you go, oh man, like that means a pretty significant, as low as the Chiefs have been rated all season, maybe for a couple of years. And you go, well, why would that be? Well, I don't know, the whole Chiefs Bills game, nonsense, right? And so that's the thing that you hear all week, and people go like, oh, I don't really want to bet the Chiefs anymore because like this, that, or whatever. And it's like, oh, that's why the number's 7.5. And by the time the weekend rolls around, the people who go, oh, honestly, this number probably should be 10, all bet the 7.5, the 8.5, the 9.5, and we get to 10. And then that ends up being the difference between winning and losing. Like that's why we do all this stuff, right? So if we take that number, that Kansas City number last week, going against the Patriots, and we say, okay, like 10 was a fair number, this number should be more than 10. They're at home against the Raiders, not that much better of a team, if they are than the Patriots. And so, this isn't a situation where like, oh man, like you can't bet the Chiefs. In fact, the same place that we're giving you the 7 points here at -118 with the Patriots over the Broncos, has a flat -110, -9.5 on the Chiefs. Right. So that's the play that I would make, right? I would take the Chiefs -9.5, because as you've seen from the Chiefs over the years, like these are the half points that matter, the points that go from a 7-point win to a 2-possession game late, where they're willing to sort of run the clock down, by the way, speaking of running the clock down, Isaiah Pacheco, looks to go, right? That's a guy who at the end of the game is going to be able to close that game out. And, then they're happy to kick the field goal and win that game by exactly 10 points. So Kansas City minus 9.5 is a bet that I've already made. We saw, Casey spotted Vegas, 14 points in Vegas like 3 weeks ago, and then just like turned it on in the second half, right? If there's one team that Kansas City is sort of comfortable with, the idea of like flipping the switch and turning it on, it's probably, Vegas. And, unlike most of the time in the last couple of, 2-3 weeks of the season, the Chiefs have a lot to play for here, right? Like this whole AFC seeding scenario situation with the Ravens literally playing later that night, potentially, as underdogs, opening the door for the idea that the Chiefs could run the table and get the 1 seed. After all of this hand wringing and head shaking, et cetera, we still might be at a situation where Patrick Mahomes doesn't have to go on the road in the playoffs. Like Kansas City should be pretty locked in for this game. So again, like I did last week, I'll lay the big number with the Chiefs here, especially, that we can get it under the double digits here at minus 9.5.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. We move on to the second game on Christmas Day. And speaking of laying big points, the Eagles are 12-point favorites at home to the Giants. Normally I start again as normal, as mentioned earlier, normally start with taking the points. And I'm not doing that here because I feel like the Eagles, who after going through the gauntlet that they've just been on, finally get desperate need of a team like the Giants that, they might be able to take advantage of. The Tommy DeVito sort of hype train slowed down for a week after.
Derailed, I think.
I was trying to be polite.
Fully off the tracks.
I was trying to be nice for my guys' feelings. Anytime you're getting sacked and knocked out and people are taking your celebration and mocking you, that's a tough look.
First quarter, like they weren't even up like 20 points. It was like, this is going to be easy work today. Like that.
And we're talking about the Saints. We're not talking about, a juggernaut here. So either way, Eagles back home, game they need to win, obviously, as they try to keep pace here and hope that they can still win their division. They need this game. Whereas the Giants, I don't know. The Tommy DeVito's thing was a nice story, but so long, farewell. Eagles minus 12. Let's go.
Yeah. And it's funny, right? Cause it's like, how do I bet on the Eagles after, all of this stuff, right? But I think, the Jalen Hurts calling out the team in general as sort of not really being that into it is probably a good thing. From a health perspective, right? Like there's nothing really to say that the Eagles can't absolutely overwhelm the Giants offensive line. Excuse me. And what's Tommy DeVito going to do? Beat the Eagles secondary, right? The issues with the Eagles has been like they've played really good quarterbacks up until last week, right? And so it's like it all kind of snowballs. And listen, I don't know what happened necessarily last week. It certainly wasn't that Drew Lock was throwing the ball deep. He ended up having to do so and took advantage of the sketchy Eagles secondary. But I don't know that. Yeah. Honestly, it could have been anybody. We would sort of blame that guy because that's the Eagles' issue right now.
Sorry, I should have given more preamble to that. There's beef between Debo and Bradbury after Debo last year called about said he's trash, and then there are highlight videos of someone showing every single reception given up on that 92-yard drive to win the game. Bradbury was the DB in coverage.
Okay.
With the Debo clip on the back end, calling him trash. Sorry, I should have given more of a preamble there.
Right, and it's circling.
I'm being tongue in cheek, obviously.
No, but and with Slay out last week, right? It's circling Bradbury and being like, okay, like that's the guy that we want anybody matched up on, right? And whether that's DK or whether that's JSN, that's the guy that they wanted to match up with. Who on the Giants is going to take advantage of that, right? And it's not Tommy DeVito. Like it's just he's not throwing the ball to anybody, and there's nobody on the team that like
Plaxico, is he available?
Plax is not. He's in the club with the jogging pants. So it's like, okay, well, how do the Giants score in this game? Because it's like Tommy DeVito loves to take a sack, loves it. Nobody likes it more. So it's going to be a lot of third and longs here. And so I don't know that the Giants score, honestly, in this game because like the running game hasn't been there with Saquon outside of a couple of big bursts. And okay, he has a couple of big runs in this game. Then you flip it and you're like, okay, I think the Eagles probably score a fair amount, because that hasn't really been the issue. I mean, they could have, should have, would have scored more points against the Seahawks. I think, that they wish they had. They certainly wish they had. And the Cowboys, they fumbled the ball a couple of times in scenarios where they were, going down to score, but they could score, with the Bills, and, they ended up scoring a decent amount of points, and a number of points against the 49ers that I think would end up covering this game, certainly. So yeah, it's uncomfortable, and it was uncomfortable when the line was 10.5. And now that it's 12, you go, okay, like somebody was interested in betting the Eagles to win this game by a big margin.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of can't really argue with that, because even if the Eagles get kind of a bump back up to where their rating was before all of this stuff, all of this schedule issue happened, we've talked about it, right? Like you played nobody last year, right? And then you play 4 straight games against like pretty good teams, and then a 5th game against in a tough spot. Like Seahawks on the road would have qualified as like the toughest game that the Eagles played all last season going into this, right? Which they lost.
Definitely.
So it's like all of a sudden their like 5th hardest game in 5 games is like the 2nd hardest game that they had all last season. Like, yeah, you are going to struggle. So is it some like, and you're going to say things like, we don't want it enough and all of that kind of stuff, because you don't want to admit that maybe you're not as good as you thought you were, because you had this really nice sort of setup all the way to the Super Bowl and played a really good game against Kansas City. Right? Like you're going to say like, oh, we need to try harder. It's like, or you're just maybe not as good as you think. Now you're going to have a try hard situation. Everybody's going to be locked in. You are still a pretty good team, and you're facing a matchup that is so much easier than anything that you've seen in like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Eagles probably blow them out, at home, obviously, and all that stuff. Like, this isn't going to be a home game against the Packers, a home game against the Patriots for Tommy DeVito. This is going to the link, man. Like, they're in big time trouble. Yeah, again, at this point in the season, like laying points, especially big numbers like this, you just have to be a little bit more interested in doing it than you would be at the start of the season. Because at the start of the season, it's like we don't know. End of the season, like we know, and we also can question whether a team like the Giants is super locked in and going on the road and getting a big win. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. Eagles big.
Also, if there's anyone who's going to know how to stop Tommy DeVito, it's going to be Nick Sirianni and Big Dom.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Big Dom. Yeah, he might get some snaps by the end of this game. Like, especially Lane Johnson's hobbling around like he was in that Seahawks game.
Screw Big Dom.
Shout out to Jason Kelsey, by the way, for moving that ball up half a yard. God, that was hilarious. It's like, oh, no wonder they get these brotherly butt pushes or whatever they're called.
Something like that.
Just move the ball up a half a yard every time. I'm sure he doesn't do it every time, but still.
Doesn't hurt. We close.
There we go.
With a Christmas Day banger. The Ravens at the Niners. Niners at home, favored by 5.5 points. I'm going to be on the Niners at -5.5. But the 5.5 point line here, it's interesting because the Ravens are looking pretty good. Lamar's doing his Lamar stuff where it's kind of in between of what we need to settle Lamar down and we got him weapons. We got this, we got that. But really, when Lamar's out there just freestyling, that's Lamar. Here's my thing. The Niners are healthy. The Niners are ready. The Niners are firing on all cylinders. And that Niners defense and their linebackers, especially Fred Warner, I'm pretty sure they're going to be sitting there ready for whatever Lamar's going to do. And the reality of Lamar, no matter what, is he still plays very loose in high leverage situations against very good defenses. And he might be turnover prone. We've seen it before. And if you're going to be turnover prone against a team, it might be a team like the Niners that has, a pass rush, great linebacking core. It's very interesting. It's going to be a big game. Lots are calling it a Super Bowl preview, all that fun stuff. I'm on the Niners -5.5. But I will say that's a lot of points. And I understand why people would be taking the Ravens. I get it.
Right.
But I need to see someone take down the Niners before I'm like, I'm worried about laying less than a touchdown.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? I bet the Ravens +6.
Mhm.
Found kind of a rogue number, honestly, just because I'm like, it's not getting higher than 6. So, you know what I mean? It's not gonna be 6.5. So like, let's get the 6 now. Maybe, just close as 5, something along those lines. Maybe I come back on the 49ers. I don't really know. Again, I'm gonna need to dig in and sort of figure out how honestly anybody beats the 49ers at this point. I've said all season, like they've been rated as a historically great team. That hasn't necessarily translated into covers every single time because of the number that
Yeah, the numbers are too high.
the numbers are craziness, right? And so, or at
Fun
least the
fact, the
closing
last,
numbers.
3 weeks, I've been in-game betting the Niners just after they're down 3-0 or down 10-7 in the first quarter. And just
Yeah.
like, oh, Niners at 7.5. That sounds a lot better than 12.5.
I was
Let's
gonna
do that.
I was gonna tweet at you when they went down to the Cardinals, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna hit you with that gif of the guy looking from behind the tree, right? Because like that was
Hold on.
you.
In real time, what was happening at that moment was from I thought our conversation prior the pod was actually on the pod. So I was about to say, as I was saying, I was at a family gathering on Sunday.
Right.
As I said earlier, it's like,
Yeah.
that wasn't on the pod.
Okay.
But either way, I was at a family gathering. Food was being served. And at the moment, it was like, hey, TV's on, Niners game's on. Everyone's watching football, and it's like, hey, do you want this? You want that? I'm like, hold on 1 second. The Niners just went down by a field goal. And I'm like on my phone, like trying so quickly. And everyone's kind of looking, and there was my one cousin in the corner that knew exactly what was going down, and he's just laughing. It was too funny. So yes, to your point.
Yeah, you did it. You were hitting it.
Would have been a great meme.
Yeah, I mean, part of me just hopes that this game can be close, because it's just like, if this game isn't close, like what game is going to be with this 49ers team, right? I've been eyeballing like the AFC, NFC, like who to win the Super Bowl markets, and I'm just like looking at them like, in what way is NFC even at like a -130, something along those lines? And it was pretty close. It was pretty much pick 'em for like the longest time this season. In what way is that not a good bet? Because like, what's the scenario where it's 49ers against whomever in the Super Bowl, and we're not looking at a field goal favorite type situation? It's not like, by the way, it's not like the 49ers have much in the way of home field advantage, right? We'll give them a 1.5 just to be kind of nice, right?
Yeah.
They have a home field advantage because they're good, not because they have a home field advantage, right?
Yeah.
So like, if on a neutral, Baltimore and San Francisco is -4, and Baltimore right now is kind of the best the AFC has to offer. I think Buffalo at this point might be better than Baltimore. I mean, I think that's a debate. Those two teams right now are, and then Kansas City, obviously kind of a close second right behind. But as far as like the we're talking about not who's going to win, right? But what the point spread would be. If we're looking at like a Ravens 49ers Super Bowl or a Bills 49ers Super Bowl, how is it not -4? How is it not -3.5?
Yeah.
Right. So like, if you can get an NFC at like under a field goal or under -150, what's the worst that's going to happen, right? 49ers lose maybe, I guess, to like Philadelphia or Dallas. And by the way, like a good Philadelphia when they're cooking and Dallas when they're cooking are rated right around the same point as the Bills and the Ravens. So you know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't be losing that much.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And again, all of that is implying that the 49ers like ever lose another game. And honestly, like, I don't know if that's going to be a thing. Yeah,
I don't know if you can hear that. I'm knocking on wood right now. I don't know.
Yeah, NFC -130. Like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, super interesting stuff here. Great week of football ahead, as there's football on Thursday and Saturday and Sunday and Monday. Just multiple games all around. Enjoy the week of football. Enjoy for sure. But in between, because there's lots going on this week, and there might be a lot of updates needed while you're getting your last second Christmas shopping in and you're on the phone. But where can the people find you, my dude?
Yeah, at MRS Authentics, where everything I write gets retweeted out, or at least I try to. This time of year gets super busy. We got college bowl season going on right now. My projections are 8-0 so far in bowl season. Does that mean I have actually won eight bets? I have not, because I'm an idiot, and I'm only 5-2. so far this bowl season, because I went against those projections, because you get information from, in bowl games and all of that kind of stuff. Worth also mentioning an article that I wrote last week about the playoffs. I think we talked about it a little bit briefly last week about the wild card round. Tried to predict the point spreads for all the playoffs. Then the Score Bet put up look-ahead lines for those playoffs, and those are available to bet. So you can go in and see sort of what I think the playoff matchups might entail, and you can actually bet those, which the Score Bet and ESPN Bet are the only places that have those up. So that's kind of fun. And then other than that, man, like, we're just trying to get in where we can get in, and while also taking enough time off to actually see one or two human beings over the course of what is, still, despite the fact that it's the holidays, a very busy time of the year for your boy. So, always something going on.
Shaking my head as I think of the 3 Raptors games between now and Christmas. Just like,
yep.
Can I just be sitting on my couch watching the Niners and Ravens game on Christmas night? I just want to fast forward to that.
Would be nice.
Is that too much to ask? That would be nice for sure. Make sure you follow Matt at MRussAuthentic and all the stuff at The Score for sure. And you can follow me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander, and on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Wherever you happen to be watching and taking in this pod, please, do us a favor, support the pod, send us a like, send us your comments and questions. Let me know how much of an idiot I am for not listening to Matt as much as I should. All that fun stuff, because it's what we do here. We have some fun. As I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Pick Sports Betting Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.